Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the July edition of Molten Music Monthly. Core blimey, it's been hot, but let's not dwell on the heat. Let's dwell on the lack of any news whatsoever. It's been dead quiet out there. It's been tumbleweed through most of the month, it has to be said, and there's not a whole lot of sign of it easing up anytime soon. So what with the heat, the component shortage, wars all over the world, Brexit, craziness, Tory candidate leadership elections, the world has gone bonkers and has become a little bit of a distraction from what's really important. Synthesizers, modular, software synthesizers, making music, audio interfaces, guitars, pedals, synths and stuff. That's what's important. Getting our souls infused into electrons, pulsing through signal chains and outputting into the world in this enormous, glorious explosion of creativity, heart, soul, sweat and tears. That's what it's all about. Gosh, that's quite exciting. But anyway, I've managed to dredge up a couple of bits for this month's Molten Monthly. Well, you know, I always find something somewhere. And so coming up, we have a barrel load of complex oscillators. Where did they all come from? I don't know. Where have they all come? Suddenly you don't have any complex oscillators and then a whole raft of them comes in all at once. Everybody's doing it. It's like everyone's got leftover oscillators and they think, I know, I'll plug this oscillator into this one, call it a complex one and jam it out there. I mean, I don't think there's actually components for anything else. I don't think there's any chips left anywhere which do anything other than oscillate. Oscillation chips seem to be okay, so let's get a couple of them, stick them together. FM it complex. I'm running on far too much, more than I normally do in my snappy, pithy one-liners at the beginning of the monthly. But hey, we have complex oscillators from Make Noise. We have them from Schlappi, CubuSynth, Weston Precision Audio, and Steady State Fate. Meanwhile, Neutral Labs want us to hack their filter. Audient makes 16-channel audio recording far too easy. GForce software nails the SEM. Build yourself a Eurorack voltage-controlled oscillator with just a $9 microcomputer. Board Brain wants to get you connected. Delta MIDI will control your virtual Minimoog. ST Modular goes euphoric. It's worth a hand signal there for some reason. I'm not quite sure. Is that Euphoria? Apparently that's Euphoria. That's nice. Aly James has a good go at the OBX. Fully Wired introduced themselves with an attenuator. Synthux Academy wants to empower you to build synthesizers. And the MidiTraC will sequence all your synths. But first, and quite sadly, Future Retro have decided to call it a day. Future Retro are a boutique maker of interesting synthesizers and controllers and other bits and pieces, and they very recently released quite an awesome vector-based multi-joystick synthesizer that appeared, I think, on Kickstarter, that got enough funding, and they've, as far as I know, supplied all of those. But at the point of doing that, they've just decided that it's enough. There's not enough business out there. There's not enough components. It's too hard. And we're starting to hear this more and more. I mean, very recently, a classic old modular builder called synthesizers.com has put itself up for sale because it can no longer sort of continue in any kind of business sense in making 5U modular. And that's really sad. I mean, it's a sign of global times, perhaps, a sign of the increase in the cost of living, but also, you know, it's this knock-on effect of the problem with components, which is continuing to plague us, continuing to be so difficult for people building electronic devices that they just can't get hold of the stuff they need to produce anything in quantity. And of course, because all the car manufacturers are desperate for these things too, they have far more clout than any little boutique maker just making synths and pedals or modular and bits and pieces. And so I think a lot of little companies out there are struggling terribly with this. I mean, many of them, it's been quite interesting, many of them have sort of retooled a bit, changed their product line, shifted from one thing to another, redesigned stuff in order to just get around the shortages and be able to keep on supplying product. But sadly, that's not always going to work, not for everybody, and it must be hard out there. I've also heard of a few other both stores that sell modular as well as manufacturers of modular that are really, really struggling and have decided to perhaps call it a day, or that this might be the last run of stuff that they do before they pack it all in. It's difficult. I mean, what can we do about that? The only thing that we could do about that is just keep on buying stuff. I mean, it seems ridiculous in times where we're all having to tighten our belts for various reasons, but still, if we want to maintain our collective community, our collective hobby, our collective interest in synthesizers, in modular, in these sorts of things, if we have any spare cash to invest in the local builders, in the boutique sellers, in those little modular shops that would really benefit from every single sale, even if they're a little bit more expensive than getting it from one of the larger firms. You know, it's worth keeping these people going, investing in them, and showing that they're still a useful resource out there. And any of you out there who are having to change jobs, having to pack it in and to go and do something else, I just wish you all the best, and thank you. Thanks for all the synths, thanks for the noise, thanks for the movement of electrons. You've been absolutely awesome. So, a whole barrel load of complex oscillators then. What are they about? Well, as I mentioned, you get a couple of oscillators, jam them together, cross-modulate, use one as your main oscillator and stick in another one to audio rate modulate the heck out of it. We're talking about FME type tones, clangs, metallic noises, strange shifting sync noises, inverted waveforms clashing and bouncing up against each other with some serious pulse width modulation all thrown in. Complex waves. So not your standard sawtooths and square waves and bits and pieces, but those will exist too. What you tend to find is two independent oscillators. That seems to be the trend at the moment, which then have options to route themselves into each other to create this, I don't know, this nastiness. Complex oscillators have not really that appealed to me, I have to say. I mean, audio rate modulation as a whole is not something that really thrills me. It should be. I know that it should be. It's something people talk about a lot. Whenever you talk about a module, one of the first things people say is, oh, well, can you do audio rate modulation? It's like, well, I don't know, I suppose so, but who wants that, eh? I mean, if you've got an oscillator, I don't mind a little bit of FM wobble, you know, give it a bit of vibrato, that's lovely, or transposition, using FM for that, but then sticking FM into doing your Doctor Who kind of FM, or your clangy belly dissonant. Well, it's plainly obvious that I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to FM and complex oscillators, because if I did, then I would know that they are an absolute joy and the most awesome thing you could possibly do with your clothes on. So what do we have? Well, kicking off, first of all, is not two oscillators, it's three oscillators. Three oscillators in, what is it called? In the three-body, there you go, the three-body oscillating behemoth from Schlappi Engineering. So this has been sort of promised for quite a while. It's taken a fair while to get here, and this is three independent oscillators in a single module. And as you can imagine, that's going to generate an awful lot of clanginess, FME cross-modulation-ness, one would imagine. I mean, first of all, you've got all of these outputs. I mean, each oscillator has the usual 4 or 5 waveform outputs, and so you've got those to start with. And so as independent oscillators, you've got three things tracking together that you can use in a polyphonic Eurorack patch, or you could use them cordially. If you use them through something like the Harmoneg, which is like a 3/4 channel quantizer for creating chords, and it's got some fabulous ideas all by itself, and no cross modulation, no FMing is necessary in any of that. It's just good old-fashioned sweet sine waves, sawtooths, pulses and triangles. But the three body is not going to stand for all that independent nonsense. I mean, while it is three independent oscillators, 4 outputs on each, plus some stereo sort of cross mixed outputs as well, you can then start indexing them into each other. You can start applying ratios. You can start doing all sorts of things. I mean, it's a massive FM playground of a zany audio rate modulating goodness, if goodness is the sort of thing that you're after. What I did find watching the demo video is that it seems actually relatively intuitive, and there's some really sweet sounds coming out of it. And so what I think they've focused on is just getting a workflow that makes some kind of sense. So you can use them independently, certainly, but you can also start blending and pushing and modulating, and to do that easily and simply with a workflow that makes sense. CubuSynth is another one. The Engine is not a company I've come across before. All of these tend to share a kind of a similar look. Big wide modules with obviously mirrored about the middle, and knobs going on for the 2 oscillators or the 3 oscillators in the 3 body, and then some kind of central thing which affects how they run into each other. That tends to be the style, and the CubuSynth Engine definitely follows that. But what I liked in particular about this particular one is just how independent the oscillators are, to the point that it feels like the focus is suggesting that it's a dual oscillator as opposed to a complex oscillator. Only in as much as that you can very easily, because of the way it's linked together, just plug in 1 volt per octave pitch from somewhere and use both of the oscillators together, lovingly detuned for fat, analog, regular waveform kind of sounds and bits and pieces. And that immediately appeals to me. Having 2 oscillators running together, great, yeah, fun times, analog goodness. But it then also does have the ability to modulate and run into each other, which then gives you access to all those complex tones, those crazy overtones and harmonics and bits of nutty stuff that goes on. But within it also has a bit of a chaos engine, and through that central, very colourful knob in the middle, you can introduce a Turing machine style randomization to various parameters, like the FM and the cross modulation bits and pieces. And I mean, in the demo videos I've seen, it results in some very sweet and interesting sounds and blasts of stuff, rather than just going crazy clangy town all the time. You've got some interesting stuff, and I quite like that. The sort of thing which perhaps would be really interesting to play with, simply because at the very basic level, you've got something that I would understand in 2 analog oscillators running together, and then you have this potential of throwing interesting things at each other. I like that. I like the way that's being presented. So I'm not faced with this primary and secondary oscillator that's modulated and hardwired into each other that's immediately complex and confusing. It starts off simply and then draws you into this idea of modulating stuff about. So I like that a lot. The Weston Precision Oscillator 2V2, they're calling it, is a similar deal actually. Very much pushing along the idea of being a dual oscillator as opposed to a complex oscillator, although it has a switch which will take you between those 2 vibes. So again, you can very much go into a detuning situation for big, fat, analog sounds and waveforms, or you can switch it into some hard or soft sync, some linear or exponential FM, and start getting crazy with those complex sounds. So again, I think that's the right approach, at least for me, because I just get scared of those big. I mean, a 3-body thing just scares me to death, and a lot of previous complex oscillators I've played with, I just end up scratching my head, going, I just don't really know. But I enjoy the idea of having 2 oscillators together that I can run completely involved in each other. That definitely appeals to me more so. The big news, of course, was the Make Noise XPO, which should probably get a whole segment all to itself, except that I'm feeling quite underwhelmed by it. I mean, they call it, of course they don't call it a complex oscillator, because that would be crazy. That would be like it exists in some kind of familiar framework to anything else that exists. Oh no, this is a stereo prismatic oscillator. Well, of course it is. So it has varied timbres and wave folding, as opposed to sort of pulse width modulation, I suppose, like normal things. But, you know, it has stereo pulse width modulation, which is very exciting. I think basically the idea is that Make Noise have made these other stereo modules, like the QPass filter, and there's got some X-Pan thing going on. And, you know, they're starting to go down this line of stereo Eurorack. And so for that, you really need a stereo oscillator, and this is what the XPO is, as much as anything else. It's designed for being panned into space, into offering stereo pulse width modulation. I don't really know why that's different to mono pulse width modulation. But hey, but it is, right? And it's important. and stuff like that. So what Make Noise have done is produce this oscillator which is going to fit perfectly into their own range of bits and pieces. I mean, if you were just to plop this into a different system, then you're probably going to have to be thinking about stereo VCAs or stereo filters, and you kind of have to buy into the whole idea of stereo if you do it too soon. I mean, generally speaking, it's not been something that interests me. I like the idea of once you get to the output stage of being able to pan stuff about the stereo field, yeah, absolutely, on a mixer, through a mixer, panning about, mono signals being panned about, obviously, or going through a stereo delay, which then gives me a stereo delay back at the end of the chain. But if you introduce stereo at the beginning, at the sound source, then everything else has to be stereo along the way. That means two of everything, or stereo versions of things. And that can get expensive in terms of HP as well as the modules themselves. So sort of going stereo in Eurorack has not really been, it's not really something that I've seen as necessary particularly. And so for me, the XPO, well, you know, looks alright, doesn't it? Personally, I think the CubuSynth Engine dual thing with a knob in the middle, which also has wavefolding, because this has wavefolding. Wavefolding is popping up an awful lot these days, which is cool. It's another way of getting interesting waveforms, and that's something that the XPO does, but also something that the CubuSynth Engine does. But of course, being Make Noise, you know that it's going to be a phenomenally high quality module. And to finish this little barrel load of complex oscillators off, we have the Zephyr from Steady State Fate. Now, this is slightly different in that it's only one oscillator. I'd be scratching my head for a bit, going, but it's a complex oscillator in as much as that. Well, you know, again, I'm thinking about this. Well, why is it a complex oscillator just because it has FM inputs? I mean, everything has FM inputs. Does that make them all complex? I guess only when you stick another oscillator in. So then are all oscillators complex? What is it that makes them complex again? I don't know. Let's have a look. It's got this internal Z-wave thing, which is a little bit of through zero phase modulation as well as FM and flipping of waveforms. I mean, basically you've got this other part within the oscillator which does crazy stuff, particularly when you put in audio rate modulation, which again is that combination of two oscillators, but it doesn't have the second oscillator in the oscillator itself. You plug in any other oscillator from somewhere else in order to take on that secondary oscillator role. So the result being that Steady State Fate are able to produce quite a compact module. It doesn't have two oscillators in it, and yet provide all of the modulation inputs and the screwiness inside to generate complex tones, just using whatever oscillators you've already got in your rack. So in some ways that makes that sort of cheaper and more versatile and interesting and better embedded into your system, and also you can ignore all of it and just use it as a regular VCO. Neutral Labs have been up to something again. I've got a few of their modules I've made up here. Look, I've got the Normal and the Meg. Nice. Quite fun they are. Interesting. Always slightly different to something else, I find. And this one called the Scrat. Yeah, the Scrat. This is no different, except this time it's a filter. It's a Steiner Parker filter from that bloke Steiner and his mate Mr. Parker. They got together, came up with a filter. And people quite like it. Arturia really like it. They used to slap it into all their synths. But this one is in a single module. And what your man at Neutral Labs has done has revealed a whole bunch of patch points on sort of patch wire socket type things. The idea being that you can mess about with it by sticking in different components. Components like resistors, capacitors, diodes, other bits of crap. You know, bits of wire, some leaves, anything you like. Put a spoon, well, a fork obviously in there would be more appropriate, I think, in order to create different connections to affect the character of the resonance ultimately. And that's a fascinating idea. But not only that, Neutral Labs has produced these little cartridges that fit into these slots that have got ready-made combinations of components on. So, you know, a couple of resistors or a thing and a thing, a capacitor and a what's-it. A light dependent resistor, so you can go wang, wang, wang on it, and you can jam those straight in, and it's almost like having preset blocks, like you would on a booklet. It's a bloody booklet in a single little filter, that's what it is. Well, no, not quite, but you know, that's the idea. You've got these little cartridges that you stick in, and they produce certain tones of resonance within the filter. It's a brilliant idea. I really like it. I hope to get hold of one, give it a bit of a go. So of course it'll be a DIY project, and that's right up my alley of putting something like that together. But I like the way that the internals of a module are spilling out of themselves into the front. You know, it's inviting you to hack it. It's inviting you to plug wrong things in just to see what can happen. And I'm sure it's quite possible that you can break it. But we'll see. I mean, I'm not going to... what could you break it with? I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about. Let's take a quick swing into audio interfaces, because this is an area that's always of interest to me, because I do still make music on computers. I'm pointing at a computer over here. It's still a thing. It's still very much something that interests me and something that I write a lot about for other things. And I have reviewed the Audient EVO 2 and 4, I think it was, the littler ones, which are quite interesting. Little boxes with a big knob on the top, and their particular unique selling point is that you just press a button and it sorts itself out for you. It automatically does the leveling and the gain staging for you, so you don't have to worry about it. You just press a button, you play your guitar, and it sorts it out and gets it to the right level, which is like, well, why haven't we always had that? Why have we always been fussing around? If we know that we are supposed to be recording at kind of minus 12 dB all the time, then why don't all audio interfaces just do that, rather than you having to fiddle around with it the whole time? Anyway, so Audient have released a 16 channel version. Well, the 16 of course doesn't refer to 16 IO. Well, kind of it does, because it's 8 in and 8 out, therefore 16. I mean, you know, you can take numbers from all sorts of places for these audio interfaces, and 16 is what they've gone for, because you can literally have 16 channels of audio, although 8 of those are going in, 8 of those are coming out. And rather than having a desktop slab of a box, they've kind of dropped to that classic 1U style thing, which always drives me nuts. I mean, okay, it's great, so you can rack it up in a audio rack, that's fine, but I would much rather have something that sits nicely on the desktop with controls on the top. But that's just me. But for 8 inputs and outputs, then having it racked up and all the cables out of the way might not be a bad thing. Other than the format change, the actual look and feel of it is very similar. Although I haven't had one in my hands, but I know with the EVO 4 I could squash it and it would kind of come apart, because it was made from hard plastic as opposed to metal. But I'm not sure. I haven't handled one of these, so I don't know how similar the EVO 16 is. And I've just realised that along with the 8 in and 8 out, you've got another 16 on ADAT. So maybe the 16 in the EVO refers to the 16 ADAT channels, 16 in and out ADAT channels. But then actually it's 24 channels with the analogue. Again, these numbers don't really work, do they? But anyway, what's important about the EVO 16 is the smart gain feature. It's the big green button on the front, and you press it, you then play your instrument or whatever, and it will sort out the levels for you, and it works. It just works. Plenty of people will be saying, oh no, I want to be doing it manually, man. I want to sit there with each channel individually, going over to the mic, going 1 2 1 2 1 2, just trying to squeeze that 1 2 1 2 1 2. Hang on, 1 2 1 2. I'm going to get a bit closer to. Oh no, I've got a minute. 1 2. You know, we love that. That's our bread and butter. We enjoy doing that like nobody's business. But for other people, perhaps a bit more forward thinking, a bit more developed in the brain. The idea is you can just press a button and go 1 2 1 2, and it will sort it all out. It's brilliant. The other thing that's great with these boxes is the interface, the software mixer that comes with it is excellent. It gives you a whole load of loopback choices, loads of monitoring mixes and bits and pieces. It's just a beautiful thing to look at. You've got metering and interesting graphical things going on. It's totally great. I mean, I'm really taken with the EVO 2 and the EVO 4. And so this, I think, is excellent. I just wish it was in a slightly different... I like the desktop format. Didn't like necessarily the brickiness. You know, I think, funny enough, Audient do other audio interfaces like the ID range, which are beautiful desktop things. And if only they'd stick smart gain into that, then that for me would be the perfect audio interface. Hands down. Perfect audio interfaces. They're good. Honestly, if you think that the smart gain feature is a bit of a gimmick, it really isn't. It just works, makes your life simpler. Absolutely every audio interface should have it. GForce Software has released the SEM, the Synthesizer Expander Module, the Oberheim Synthesizer Expander Module. A little while ago they released their Oberheim 8-voice emulation software, which was superb, and it was the first piece of software that actually sounded good enough to Tom Oberheim for him to go, yeah, you know what? That's as close as you're going to get in software. That sounds pretty awesome. And it was. I mean, it just sounds fabulous. It sounds really good. I had a thoroughly good time doing a little video on that and enjoying it. It was just brilliant. But of course, the 8-voice is 8 SEMs. That's essentially that. A little bit of hard wiring stuck in behind the scenes just to get it all to work together. So it makes it's no surprise that they then decided to release the SEM by itself. In fact, this is a bit of a surprise. It took them so long to do it, to be honest. But this is a single voice from the 8-voice. You've got 2 oscillators, a third one, and an LFO for modulation, really, although it can also provide its own oscillations. It's got that fantastic filter built in that we know so well from Oberheim synthesizers. And just as a monophonic synthesizer voice, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Sounds fantastic. The first preset is to die for. And the first time you try it out, you lose half an hour just playing with that. It's just great. There's something about it that captured a character and a sound. I mean, I'm talking about the original Oberheim SEM that sounds like nothing else, quite. I mean, it sounds like everything else, if you know what I mean. It sounds, if you imagine in your head the sound of a monosynth, this is what you're probably imagining, and it absolutely fulfills that need for fat bass sounds, awesome lead sounds, or spooky, ethereal, ambient kind of nonsense that just makes you trip off your head. It does have reverb and delay built in, both of which are awesome, sound fantastic, because that's what it needs. Yeah, on its own, monosynths are a bit monosynthy, but as soon as you run through a couple of effects, they just take on a whole different life. It's a flipping phenomenal piece of work. It really just sounds awesome. It's about 30 quid, 35 quid. Presets, phenomenal. It's just excellent. Go and get it. There's a lot of build it yourself stuff around at the moment, a lot of it focusing on microcontrollers, although microcontrollers are one of those things which have become a little bit scarce, but it depends what you're talking about. I mean, larger things like the Raspberry Pi, you can't get those for love nor money, but the smaller ones do seem to be available, and so people are digging into those to see what on earth we can do with them in terms of creating synthesizers and Eurorack modules so we don't have to be using the ICs that are in such short supply. And one such project I came across was by a guy called Hagawo could be, in Japan I believe, and I had to do a fair bit of translating to get to the bottom of what he was going on about, but essentially using a Raspberry Pi based seed, a Zio RP2040, some kind of microcomputer thing. So a bit of software jammed on this here chip and a couple of components, a couple of knobs, switches, bits and pieces just to interface with it. You could create an entirely voltage controlled oscillator. I mean, it's digital, obviously, creating digital waveforms, but it can be put together in such a nice, small, compact format that it fits into quite a cool looking Eurorack module. It's a project you've been working on for a while, and on its website you've got absolutely every detail, down to the front panel design, down to how you get it onto the PCB, the soldering, the materials, the programming. It's all in there. And ultimately, this guy is building an entire modular system, and he's gone through a lot of modules so far, and this is the first time I'd come across it when he's putting together this little VCO. It has a number of waveforms inside. It's also relatively complex in that you can run one oscillation into each other internally and do wavefolding, amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, all within the module itself. So it's a very cool little thing. So if you fancy getting into building some of your own modules but using somebody else's code in order to do that, then this is a great way in. I think I'm seeing more and more modules built on little microcontrollers like this, like the Electrosmith Daisy, Arduino mini tiny ones and such like and so forth. And it's a whole interesting world of module that comes out of that, because we don't really care where the waveform comes from, or at least I don't. I mean, I say I love analog sounds, which I do. But if that analog waveform is being essentially generated by a digital source, I don't really care that much. It's the same sort of waveform, ultimately. And within these little microcomputers, microcontrollers, we can build entire modules that really do reduce the number of components you actually need on the PCB. And so we can do interesting and creative things on small modules quite cheaply, which can add a whole interesting flavour to your modular. And maybe even introduce more people into the idea of synthesizer design, like myself, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment with another thing. But all of this I find really interesting, although coding is not necessarily my thing. I have done it in the past. Doesn't thrill me, perhaps, but it's interesting nonetheless, because there's that desire to design synthesizers, desire to build things which are yours, which come from your mind, of your way of doing things. And that does, at some point, perhaps bubble over into the sod it, I'm going to program it in some kind of microcomputer thing, jam it on the back of a module, because I'm not going to be able to do the circuit design on a PCB and then get that fabricated and then get that back and then test it, then refabricate it back, because that's a much bigger deal than designing something in software and then testing that out on a breadboard. So you sometimes you just want to follow the path of least resistance, and sometimes that is a coding path of microcontrollers. So in that case, let's jump to the Synthux Academy, which is the other product in this month's monthly, which is all about building your own synthesizers. Now, this is an interesting idea that, again, it kind of makes me, I think it's fabulous. At the same time, it just seems to be a little bit sneaky. And I'll tell you why. What this is it's a wonderful golden brown PCB, and the idea is the marketing behind it goes, build your own synthesizer, and let's go. You got your big PCB and you just seem to be plugging knobs into it, a couple of switches, and ta-da, here's a synthesizer. And you look at the website going, well, that's quite interesting. Well, how do they manage to do all that? Where's all the synthesizer garbage, the stuff that actually makes the sounds? I've got a lovely control surface. It's down here in this daisy, in the Electrosmith daisy down here. Oh, okay, so actually it's not really an analog synthesizer that we're putting together. What we're putting together is a control surface for a digital synthesizer inside this chip. That's what it is. I'm not building a synthesizer, I'm building a control surface. So and that has a whole different flavour to it. I mean, ultimately, when you boil down to it, if you are coding and designing something for a microcomputer, then you are building a synthesizer. You're just building it in a digital form. So the thing itself is this big gold thing. You've got 80 sockets on it. They call them footprints, I think it is. And this footprint will take either a pot, a proper analog pot, or a switch or a mini jack. And you put those in, and then you solder the corner wire. They're all controlled by a single wire. Single wire is brought over to a patch bay, which then patches it into the daisy, which is a microcontroller which you program with some kind of synthesizer module thing. So if you want to control the filter, you need to take the filter out. It's one of the pins on the daisy. That goes to the patch bay. That goes out to a footprint. You put a knob on it, and there you've got analog control over that digital thing. I mean, it could be MIDI. Do we really need to be soldering these components on here? Because you are just essentially creating a control surface for it. Or are you? Maybe I'm looking at this all wrong. I don't know. I just kind of feel there need to be resistors and capacitors on the board to make it feel more like a synthesizer. Whereas I'm just really wiring in a pot to control something. But I mean, I guess what you are doing is thinking about interface design. You're thinking about the user interface. You're thinking about how you want to control things. You're thinking about your signal reading, your inputs, your outputs, your control voltage connections. Is it control voltage going in? I guess it is, because you do have a certain number of audio inputs and outputs on the daisy, and so they could just as well be control voltage as they are audio. I don't know. But ultimately, the Synthux Academy wants to teach you about synthesizer design, teach you about programming, teach you about layout, user interface, and all of the things that go on into making a synthesizer. And that's a brilliant intention. And they're going to be providing not only the kits to get you started, but also video tutorials and tutoring on getting the whole thing coming together. I mean, it's a great idea. I wish them all the best with it. I mean, it does, again, it's this thing, it goes, coding, I don't want to code, I don't want to waste my life code. Do I want to? Maybe I do. I mean, that's one of the reasons perhaps that they don't really show any coding on the website, because coding's boring. It just is. No, it's not. I mean, it can be for some people, and I think that will perhaps scare people off. But if they can entice people in with the idea that this is a hardware project and just go, oh well, you know, you've just got to just copy this bit of software over here, we'll show you how to edit a few lines to make it do something slightly different, and then you can get back on with the soldering and the hardware side of it. So, you know, perhaps they're sneaking us in there and hoping to encourage us into the idea that coding is okay and it's relatively easy and straightforward, because I mean the software platform that it runs on are now pretty well established, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you can just borrow other people's ideas and stick it on. So yeah, fabulous. The SynthX Academy, Simple it's called. Not a bad name for something. Let's hope that it is. But you can get the PCB direct from them, or you can get like a bundle with lots of knobs and the Daisy or the Arduino in order to run the thing from places like Thonk. Right, back on track with Board Brain. Our friends at Board Brain are creating some more connectivity modules for Eurorack. They're big on this. I mean, their optics with the ADAT going in and out was phenomenal. They've also produced a sort of guitar interface that I could almost point at, which is over there, which is great for bringing in instruments or guitars into your Eurorack. And now they're expanding that kind of signal connection idea into 3 new modules. There's Monitr, UniFX, and Xchangr. They have a problem with vowels, I think, ultimately. But one of them, UniFX, I believe, is like a pedal effects chain. So you've got an input and output on big jacks, run those through a whole bunch of guitar pedals, run it back in, and it's perfectly placed to be an effects chain within your Eurorack. Great, simple. You've got a wet and dry mix, which of course is something that doesn't often happen in these sorts of things. So that's an awesome thing to have. Although I would like to see a bypass switch. I'm a fan of a bypass switch. Bypasses just don't seem to be a thing in Eurorack, which is a shame. I've got an effects loop. I just want it to no longer be there. Rather than having to dial down the wet and dry mix, I just want to kick it out and then perhaps bring it back in, like you do. I mean, you know, pedals and guitarists are bypassing stuff all the time with the foot switches. Why can't we have that in Eurorack a little bit more stuck into the module, worked into the module? So I might have like 16 pedals that this is going through. To bypass them, I'll have to jump on them all at once. Whereas just to have a single switch within my Eurorack module would be awesome. Although it does have CV control over the mix, so you could do that. With control voltage. Yeah. Okay, next one's called Monitr, which is like a big fat output module, but you've got 2 separate channels which you can mix together. And so you've got a main output on big jacks, and you've got other inputs for these 2 stereo inputs you can have, which you can then mix between. I don't think I'm explaining it very well, but essentially 2 stereo channels into a single module, which gives you a big master output, headphone output, some nice LED monitoring, a nice knob on the front. It's a good chunky output module. And lastly, we have the Xchangr. Now this is like a couple of auxiliary sends from a mixer. So you send stuff out through an effects loop and it comes back again. It's 2 stereo sends and 1 stereo return. So presumably you would use one of them out through some effects and back into the return, and the other one goes out through some effects and never comes back. It just goes. It's just, you know, you just send your audio out and it's gone out there somewhere, never to return. So I mean, that's quite cool. But these are great. I mean, Board Brain have made some excellent modules, some very, very solid, competent, chunky, these sort of really work hard type modules, and these are phenomenal ways of integrating other bits of external stuff into your Eurorack. So yeah, great stuff. The annoyingly named Delta MIDI. I mean, it's annoying only because they use the sign. They use the Greek symbol for delta, which is difficult to type if you're trying to write up about it, or you're trying to Google it. How are you going to, who's going to put that in, honestly? People, you need to think more about their company names, their product names. They really do. But that's not for me to say. I mean, hey, get creative out there, man. Put it all in Greek letters. That'll get you found on Google. No bother, one should think. Anyway, Delta MIDI 001 Model D. There's a mouthful. This is a hardware controller for your software Minimoog. Oh yes. Now this is something we've seen before from S-Force, I think it is. Yes. Where you have a hardware controller, a hardware MIDI controller for a specific piece of software synthesizer. This is a new one. It's nicely and neatly compact and gives you the layout that you want. You know, the layout follows it exactly. It's not baked into a wooden case, so it's actually quite affordable and gives you a great way of controlling your software in an intuitive hardware sense. Now, of course, you can use any MIDI controller to control your software synths. No bother. So why have one that's specifically tied to a particular piece of software? Well, simply because you're trying to emulate that hardware experience. And if all the knobs are where the knobs are on the screen, and the knobs are here, then you actually don't have to look at the screen anywhere near as much. You can just get down to the hardware and it becomes a hardware experience. And that can be very interesting. It's a nice idea. It's a bit luxurious, perhaps, to have an individual controller for a piece of software, considering you might have dozens of software synthesizers. In order to give you a really good Model D experience, then that could be the way forward. The only slight problem is the cost. I mean, it's cheaper than the Soundforce one because it doesn't have the wooden sides and the case and that kind of thing. It's sort of more stripped down, but I do actually like the look of it and the fact that it's using pots rather than encoders, which gives it much more of a hardware feel, which I think is a great idea. But you still end up probably paying more than you would for buying like a Behringer Model D, which is an actual analog synthesizer. So it's difficult. I think it's hard to produce a MIDI controller of this sort of quality and this sort of control for cheap enough to make you think it's a throwaway purchase. However, if you're the sort of person who enjoys using software synthesizers within your studio because they're much more recallable, they're part of your project, they make a lot of sense, then this is one way of having good intuitive hardware control over that software environment. And so for those reasons, it's an excellent idea. ST Modular makes beautiful, beautiful things, and this is absolutely the pinnacle of what he's done so far. Euphoria, it's called. It's a complete semi-modular monosynth, I suppose, inspired by the Buchla Music easel, but it completely does not look that way. I mean, once you sort of try to boil it down into its components and you go, oh yeah, all those sliders, yeah, okay, the wave folding, oh, function generating, yes, you can see where those bits and pieces come from, but the design of it and the look of it and the flow of it, I mean, the way he shoots these videos, they are just gorgeous. And the funny thing is that he only ever produces the front panel and the PCB, and so the knobs are completely arbitrary. You can get whatever knobs you like and put on it, but his choices, the aesthetic that he uses, the color choices of bits and pieces are just brilliantly chosen, just exquisite, I would say. And so you have this gorgeous thing in these videos. It's glowing and bubbling and moving about, and it just looks like this could be a fantastic project for somebody. It has about 14 different modules built in, and they've done it in a modular fashion so that each of the modules has its own PCB. So rather than one big PCB that you then have to build and populate, you've got 14 individual PCBs, so that if something goes wrong in one of them, you don't have to break the whole thing in order to try and work out what's wrong. Because, as I say, this is a DIY project. You will not, or at least initially, be able to buy it built unless you get someone to build it for you, but then it's going to get a lot more expensive quite quickly because there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of components going on in here to build this sort of thing. And as I say, 14 individual modules to build, all of which require components and soldering, surface mount, as well as through hole. A lot of stuff going on. But because it's individual, as I say, if you have trouble with one section, it means you can still use the rest of it while you troubleshoot that little bit. So that's quite interesting. There's also some upgradable possibilities where you can make choices on the PCB which affect essentially whether you want an extra this or an extra that, or change it, or this, that and the other. It's very, very adaptable and versatile because it's not all made. You can make choices as the builder of the synthesizer as to how you want it actually to be, as well as, of course, the front panel aesthetic. The front panel is done for you, but the knobs, those sorts of things, those choices of components, even down to the colours of the LEDs, are down to you. So I believe that Pusherman will be doing a kit version of this, a full kit in limited numbers, because it's going to get expensive. I mean, the amount of SD Modular reckon you could build it for 600 quid. That seems a little bit of an underestimate, I would say. But I mean, obviously, if you factor in your time, it's completely priceless, because it's going to take you a fair while. So once I've finished the Deckard's Dream, perhaps once I've finished the Cosmo format modules, then maybe I'll give that a go. I quite fancy it. It's a beautiful looking thing. And it's interesting that entire talk about it was purely about what it looks like. Nothing to do with what it sounds like. Do I care what it sounds like? No, I've looked at all the videos with the volume down. I've just gone, well, that looks beautiful. Gotta have it. Why do we do that? Why do I do that? I need a good talking to. Someone needs to sit me down and go, look, you need to listen to those waveforms. And you need to listen to them raw, right? No effects, otherwise that's cheating. Got to listen to the raw sawtooth sound for 5 minutes at least, at different octaves, going, yeah, sawtooths. But no, honestly, in the demos, it also does sound great. In a buckler, blippy, bloopy, kind of interesting, wavefoldery way. I spoke earlier of the magical GForce SEM. Well, there's another Oberheim emulation out there called the OB-Xtreme, and it's hit version 2. It's from some bloke called Aly James, or some lass, I don't know. But it's quite a phenomenal take on the OBX, the OBX8, the OBXA, the OBX, all the OBXs, all of them dragged into a single powerful, big, bonkers software emulation of a synthesizer. It's an 8-voice polysynth and also has 8-voice unison, and bizarrely you can mix the unison with the polyphonic engine to create an 8-voice polyphonic 8-stacked layered voice of unisons. That's a lot of oscillators. It's got quite a cool interface where you can turn it inside out and start filling with individual voice cards, which I quite like. And they've built in a whole load of, from version 1 to version 2, a whole load of extra falling apartness. So you can like prod a voice card and bits will start falling off and it will sound slightly worse. Or slightly better, depending on your view. So there's a ton of deviation, a ton of offsets. There's macro knobs in order to push lots of different parameters in different directions to give you very pleasing outcomes. It's just a nice, well put together, Oberheim sounding software synthesizer. Now, what I said earlier about supporting the boutique, supporting the modular makers and sellers and bits and pieces, and this is an example of this. I'm always very, very keen to support new modular makers. So if you are a new modular maker out there, do get in touch. I'm very, very happy to talk about you and to encourage them along the way to producing more and more different and exciting models as they go. But of course, everybody starts with an attenuator. And fully wired electronics are no different. And they've got their first thing out there. It's called the DPA, the dual passive attenuator. Passive, glorious. You see, no power supply required. It just does its thing. Attenuator. We all need attenuation. We all need to turn stuff down because we're too loud nearly all the time, too extreme at every point. And it's dual. There's 2 of them. You get 2 for the price of 1. Well, I don't know that you do, but you get 2 within it. Now, Dan, who's behind the fully wired electronics, has been working with Stochastic Instruments for a long time, building all their sort of bits and pieces, and is now starting to strike out by himself with fully wired. And he has a whole load of stuff ready to go, but he's just testing the waters with an attenuator. There you go, try that out. I mean, we all need those. There's no doubt about it. What's interesting about this particular one is that it has a little switch between linear and exponential. So linear being preferred for CV, for control voltages, and exponential preferred for audio. So you can use it for either. One is normalized to 2, so you can put one thing in the top and get 2 different versions coming out the bottom. 2 different attenuated versions. Simple, straightforward, passive. It will just pop into your rack somewhere and do its job day in and day out. It's only 30 quid and comes with a free pair of knurlies. Now it's almost worth it just for the knurlies. MidiTraC is an interesting sort of clackety keyboard buttony type sequencer for polyphonic synthesizers. It's very, very small, lovely clacky keys, and will give you 16 channels of polyphonic sequencing for all of your surrounding polyphonic synthesizers. It's based in patterns and songs. You can put together different patterns and then move between them. You've got momentary mute switches on different channels that you can wire in and put in. You can transpose on the fly. You can swap patterns on the fly. It's got a very simple display interface, which then gives you probably a bit of a deep dive into some kind of menu system, because it has a lot of features baked inside there. You've got a lot of randomization that you can apply to sequence generation. You can set scaling and range levels to that so that the randomization isn't too crazy. It just happens within a small defined field. And this is all MIDI. This is all MIDI going out to your gear, not about control voltage. This is about sequencing those synths you've got stacked up on your rack behind you that you occasionally plug into your DAW. It's quite interesting. I mean, you can go from a single MIDI controller into it and it will record everything. It doesn't care what sort of MIDI you put into it, it'll just keep capturing it. So whatever knobs you move, anything, an expression you put in, aftertouch, modulation, CC numbers, it will take all of it and take that within its loop and then allow you to overdub over the top, pretty much as you like. And then you can move to another synth or another MIDI channel and do the same and keep on building in like an audio looper kind of way, it sees itself. It will also do step recording as well as live recording. You've got arpeggiation built in there and all sorts of quantization options. It's currently a bit of a developing project from a guy called Alfred from Alfred Labs, and his intention is that this is a labour of love that he's been working on. He's been working on it on a forum and got lots of inputs from different people and a few beta testers out there giving it a go. But he would really like it to sort of find its way to a new level where a manufacturer can take it on to give it a bit of a wider thing. Because he can build a few himself, and he has been. He's been putting those out there. But he's got a day job, like most of us, and hasn't got the time to turn into a full-time sequencer maker. But once he's get a little bit more coverage and people get to know about them, then maybe someone out there will be able to take on the idea of producing these in larger numbers, because they're quite interesting. I really like the fact that it's so compact that it can sit there and you can just plug a chain of polysynths into it and just get busy without having to worry about your computer, without having to worry about other bits and pieces. You can just get straight to it, and that definitely appeals to me. And also in a live performance context, and be able to swap patterns very easily, to mute different bits in and out, all from a simple, small little device. Yeah, interesting. A lot of potential in that, I think, and there's a possibility I'll get hold of one, in which case I will tell you all about it. And finally, tickets are on sale now for SynthFest UK. It's on the 8th of October up in Sheffield, in the place where it normally is, and there will be exhibitions, there will be modular, there will be retailers, there will be some education, there will be seminars, workshops, panels, all sorts of stuff happening up there. It's a really fun time. I absolutely hope to go. I don't know yet whether I'm just going as a punter or I'm going and doing something. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Who knows? I'm available, booked. You can book me for a party. Quite happy to come along and talk modular for a bit. Anything you like. I'm available, I suppose. Otherwise, I'll just turn up and have a good time. That's fine. That's also a good option. But that's available. But I also wanted to just hint at something that is bubbling away in the background that has the potential to be serious, and that is the very first Molten Modular Synth Meet. It's an event which is being sketched out at the moment in Norwich, for the east of the country, because we don't seem to get very much up our way. So I felt that there was a hole. There's a hole, obviously, Norfolk being that hole, I imagine. But if you can get, if you fall down the hole over in Norfolk and end up in Norwich, it could be a fantastic place to get together to talk about modular and synthesizers in a big, one day only, full of performances and stuff type thing. So I'm currently talking to a few people and trying to find a venue to put all this sort of thing together. So I'm thinking November might be a good dead month when nothing else is going on. Sort of time you could get on a bus and get off a couple of days later and find yourselves in Norwich. Anything is possible, and we'll spend the day talking about exhibiting stuff. I mean, I've got a load of stuff. I'll drag all this along and you can have a poke and see what it's all about. Do a few performances. I'll get some world famous class acts down to perform for free, for nothing. So if you're a first class act out there that fancies, who's never performed in Norwich and fancies giving that a go to 12 people in a pub back room in November, then do give me a shout. And I mean that sincerely. You know, I am going to endeavour to try to put this together, and it could be exciting. But it's only going to be exciting if people come, if people bring stuff, if you book a table and bring your modular, stick it there, or bring a synthesizer to show, you know. That's going to be it. So manufacturers out there, if you want to come and do your thing after you've got over SynthFest, then come. We'll have space for you, no doubt. If you're a shop, want to sell stuff, come do it. You've got a t-shirt, stickers, bring the lot. Or just come down and have a poke around. Because as I say, I've got at least 3 things I can bring. And we can all sit around going, oh, yeah, that's nice. That's nice. What's this then? And that kind of thing. It'll be great. It'll be great. So nothing is confirmed. I have no venue. I have no idea what I'm doing. But the idea itself has taken root somewhere, and so I tend to find that when that happens, I somehow, through just brute force and willpower, bring things into being. That's what I tend to find. So it's there at the moment. It's on its journey. So there's every possibility that it may occur. That's something to look forward to later in the year, and I'll keep you updated on what's going on. But by all means, let me know if you're interested in coming, want to come, want to do something, have any ideas. Do get in touch. I'm absolutely open to anyone who has a plan, anyone who happens to own the Theatre Royal in Norwich or a decent exhibition space that wants to give it to us for free. You know, that sort of thing. That would be awesome. Let's do that. So cool. So that's coming up. So yeah, I think that'll do. I think that's plenty. I've exhausted myself doing this. So what's coming up then? Well, my projects for the summer, because summer is weird in that I get less time, but then also I get more time because I'm going away a bit. The kids are around, but I'm also not having to pick kids up from school or get them ready for school in the morning. So there's sort of time is reclaimed as well as given away to other things. So my plan over the summer is to do a few particular videos. I want to do a video on the Moog Mavis, which I have over there, and comparing it to things like the Create Audio East-West Pest Beast thing, and maybe the Dystopia, a couple of other synths, right? I want to do a bit on that. I want to do a bit on the Behringer 2500 modular. I want to get into that. I want to do a bit more tape stuff, get involved in that. I've got a number of modules to demonstrate and to show you, as well as there's an electronic open mic night on the 4th of August in Norwich at a new venue. I'm definitely planning to play, if only I can pull it all together. So if you look for Electronic Music Open Mic Night Norwich on Facebook, you'll come across it somewhere. Definitely planning to get to that one. I can't guarantee it, of course, because anything can happen between here and then. But that's next week, right? I think I'm about. So yeah, I'm going to plan to go to that. That should be great. This Sunday, I'm going away for a few days, but I'm back on Sunday. So Sunday night, let's have a beer, let's relax, chill out, and have a chat, a chinwag. Live streaming Sunday night, 8 o'clock, British summertime, and we'll talk about these sorts of things. We talked about the possibility of this Molten modular meet thing last month in the last live stream, which has kind of kicked me off about it. But I think the idea of having it on a boat on the Broads is just not a goer. It's just not going to happen. But it was something that we talked about at the last live stream, which was very cool. So let's talk about more of that this month. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much it for now. There will be another Erica Synths build coming up very soon. I think in a week or two. I think it's the sample and hold and the noise module. So yeah, I will be giving that a go somewhere in between holidays and bits and pieces. So do look out for that. Otherwise, also my experiment with doing a written version of the Molten Monthly is still trucking along, and you'll find that on our website a couple of days after the video goes live. So if you're more interested in reading something and want to go back and read it, then do go and check that out. Also, that's full of affiliate links for products that you can go and buy. Stuff that I've talked about, stuff that I haven't talked about. You can go and buy it with my wonderful affiliate links, and that gets me a couple of quid in compensation, which is nice. Or you can come and join us on Patreon, where you can give me a couple of quid, which is always appreciated. Otherwise, subscribe, share the videos around, just send me cash in manila envelopes. That's always nice. If you need my address, just drop me a line. That's fine. I don't care. All encouragement and contributions are gratefully received. So that'll do, I think. Yeah, I think that's cool. All right, see you Sunday. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.